knowing who you are before we all maybe start talking, just to see what disciplines you're from. So maybe if we could just quickly go around the room and you could, I mean, I'm not going to remember names, but you could say your name, and then what program you're in. So we'll just start here.
I'm Cassie. I'm actually from FIMS, so I'm a marine science major.
I'm Megan, also from FIMS.
I'm Charlie, I'm from physics.
I'm Brittany, I'm from biology.
I'm Johan from Applied Science. I'm in my 5th year.
Ashley from FIMS.
Annie from FIMS as well.
I'm Joe from chemistry.
Shaya from physics. Peter from physics.
I'm also from physics.
Wade from applied science.
Owen from FIMS.
Well, thank you, because I know that we're all going to be making probably comments or providing advice that in some respects might be somewhat discipline specific, and so you have to probably sort through what's generally applicable and what might be some particular pattern or bias that we have in our own field. So I guess we'll start out with just making some general comments, and shall I make it? Sure. Yeah. So I guess, I mean, my remarks are really tailored to getting a job in academia. So of course what I'm thinking about is a position as a tenure eligible assistant professor at a university or college. So for some of you, you're at a point in your academic progression where that's going to be a little further down the road. So I'm a biologist, and that means that in my field, typically, after you complete a PhD, you have to do a few years of postdoctoral training. Back in my day, that was still usually the common route, but occasionally you might manage to secure a faculty position without a postdoc. And I ended up going off to New Zealand and got a faculty position without a postdoc. And it's not, I mean, it worked okay, but it wasn't necessarily a path that I would recommend. Now I think it's not so much of an option even to do that. And the reason that I say that is I think that you really need at least 2 years of postdoctoral training to really establish yourself, get some publications out from your PhD, maybe your first one from your postdoc, and then have others in the pipeline. So when you start as a new faculty member, you have some things that you know you're going to be able to get out in those first few years. Even if they're not directly from your own lab, you at least have things that you know you can work on. When I went straight into the faculty position, I was still struggling to get the paper out from my PhD, and it took a while before I got up to speed. And eventually it all worked out, but it was a very uphill kind of push. So when you have completed your PhD and had maybe a year or two as a postdoc, that's probably the time, at least in biologically oriented fields, to start looking for a job. Any earlier, and I think you just don't really have that base. And I think there are a lot of institutions that won't even look at someone who's just completed a PhD or soon to be completed. They just put that in the pile of, don't spend more time on this. You need that postdoctoral training. Some of the things that I know that I look at when I'm on a search committee or reviewing applications is really evidence of independence. And of course, when you're in graduate school or postdoctoral training, you are having to answer in some respect to your PI, but you have to really work on showing your independent thought as much as possible, and knowing that your PI is going to write a strong letter saying, of course, this person was working in my lab, but the idea is the intellectual driving force was really, from them, and so that you're really showing that you can come up with a plan, and also that you have the ability to obtain funding. Now, that might be difficult because you can't always apply for grants as a graduate student or a postdoc, but you can apply for fellowships, travel grants, anything that shows that you're thinking about funding and that you've at least tried to demonstrate that within the realm of funding that's available that you can do that. And you really want to have that steady track record of publications. I mean, something that I always look at is within my discipline, what's considered a good track record, and then is it in quality journals? I have personally no interest in bean counting. I don't go through and say, oh, this person has 10 publications, yay. It's more, okay, they have a nice steady record and it's in really high quality journals. It doesn't have to be nature or science, but quality journals in that discipline, and ones that really represent full and complete work as opposed to just getting out the least publishable kind of unit. Now, depending on where you might be applying to a university that really emphasizes research over teaching, or you might be applying somewhere that has a strong emphasis on teaching and research, or one that has a strong emphasis maybe more on teaching and not so much on research. But in all cases, I know from our own search committees and also talking with colleagues at a variety of institutions, the bottom line really gets down to research and publications. Even at some place that's a primarily teaching institution, these days the job market is really competitive, and so they're still looking for that top-notch scientist who has a lot of publications and hopefully will continue to engage in scholarly activity, even if it's not at a really major research university. But if you're applying someplace that has teaching as a component, then you want to demonstrate some teaching experience. And often that may be that really all you've had the opportunity to do is serve as a teaching assistant, maybe teaching labs, maybe doing discussion sessions. Maybe you have had the opportunity to teach a course, but not everyone can do that in their program. So you almost have to kind of go out of your way a little bit, maybe to offer to give guest lectures, anything that you can build up that portfolio of teaching to say that you know a little bit more about it. And that helps certainly in writing a personal statement about what your philosophy is. It's hard to do that if you haven't had the actual classroom experience. If you're applying at a place, for example, like William and Mary, where you might be working a lot with undergraduates, then you'd want to be showing evidence of a real interest in working with undergraduates. And you could change undergraduate to any word that you want, really, apply it to the situation. The point is that you know where you're applying and you're targeting your level of interest to what is important or what the mission is of that particular university. So when you're writing a research plan, if you're going to a place where undergraduates will be involved in research, and maybe graduate students as well, you want to have a philosophy or a statement of projects that actually would work for students at a variety of levels, if that's what's important. Okay, so that's some sort of general things about what you might want to be working on. These days, job searches get an overwhelming number of applications. And I think in the time that I've been at William and Mary, we started out with maybe having, I don't know, depending on the particular subdiscipline in biology, we might have had maybe 50 to 70 applications, which was good. Well, now we might get 200 to 300 applications. So you have to stand out. And as you can imagine, search committees get pretty tired pretty quickly if they're having to work through a disorganized CV where they can't really find the most important information and it's kind of buried in all sorts of things that aren't that important. As an example, if you're listing your publications and you have what I would call real publications, ones that are either in press or already published, interspersed with manuscripts in preparation or ones that are submitted or under peer review or anything like that where they really haven't been published, it's just irritating. When you're trying to go through 200 applications and you can't even figure out how many publications does this applicant really have, or if you've put meeting abstracts in, so you presented a poster and that's in with the publications. It's fine to have all that information, but it needs to be in very separate categories. Here are the published peer-reviewed papers. Here are the meeting abstracts. If you want to have a section on manuscripts in preparation, you could, doesn't mean much. Most of us would just look at it and go, oh, yeah, right, we'll see these 10 years from now. You know, it's just not, put it in your research statement, that yes, you have plans, you have things in the pipeline, things you're working on, but not the list of manuscripts in preparation. To me, it just doesn't look good. So part of the CV and the personal statements is about being really concise and organized. And part of that is that what you're showing is evidence of communication skills. And as scientists, we need to be able to communicate, both in writing and verbally. So the first thing a search committee sees is how you can communicate in writing. And if it's disorganized and it's really hard to figure out what your main point is and the information is all over the place, what does that say about you as a scientist and your ability to communicate? Not much. No one wants to read a 5-page statement of research interests if you have 200 or 300 applications to look at. Concise, to the point, really well organized, stands out. If you get an interview, which I'm sure someday you'll all be in that position of the interview, you'll probably be asked to come and meet with a lot of faculty, meet with students, and then there's the showpiece of all, at least in my discipline, is the seminar. And in the biology department, we really look at the seminar as being that make or break part of the interview. If an applicant can get up and give a really strong seminar that shows that they're able to take their science and make it approachable to a wide audience. In biology, we have many different subdisciplines. So is it approachable to everyone? Is it approachable to faculty as well as undergraduates as well as graduate students? Like, you have to know your audience. Who are you talking to? Are you applying to a department where everyone is going to really know a lot about your particular field of research? Well, then you can pitch your talk at a higher level. But if it's a really broad department, you have to pitch it at a level where you don't dumb it down to the point that they feel like there's no science here, but also not making it just data slide after data slide after data slide where it's just like you have no idea what the importance is. So the seminar is really key. If you're going to some place where you'll be teaching, it shows whether you can teach or not. Can you really engage an audience? Can you explain things really clearly, especially to people who are outside your discipline? So that's where I think it's really important to give practice talks and to get a lot of feedback from your colleagues, from people outside your discipline, from people at different levels. And that is what you should really spend a lot of time on. That seminar just has to be brilliant because, again, it's competitive, and that's the point where you can really capture the interest in what you do. I also suggest going to a lot of seminars, in every seminar you can, and thinking about what works and what doesn't. And there are things in seminars that we can all look at and go, oh, this is a good thing to never do. I remember one, I'll stop talking in just a moment, but I remember one job applicant who during the seminar paced, back and forth like this, and it was the most extreme pacing, and he would be up the aisle, and then he would be over here, and I have no idea what he was talking about because I was watching him moving in these patterns, and I was like, wow. And he also spoke in a really dramatic voice, and he'd get really low, and then he'd get really loud, and he'd be going up and down, and none of us remembered anything about his job seminar. So, there's extremes like that. But it's getting the right balance and pitching it to the right level. And that just says a lot about your abilities in a faculty position. You should know the department. So when you're applying, certainly in your cover letter, make sure that your cover letter is pitched correctly to, sometimes we get cover letters that say the wrong institution, and it's a simple cut and paste mistake, but it just doesn't look good. But otherwise, reflecting that you've done your homework. It's so easy to get information about all the faculty in a department, what the facilities and resources are, what's the core mission, all these things. And you can put that into your cover letter and really target each letter. You should have a separate letter for every job that you apply for. And then in the interview, really making it clear that you know as much as you can ahead of time about the department. And it can go to the other extreme, I guess, too, where you're sort of dropping too many names and saying that you could collaborate with half the department or something. But I think it's really important to do that work ahead of time so that it's very clear that you're potentially very interested and that you know what goes on in a department. All right, I will stop.
So what I'll try to do, I'll try not to repeat anything that Liz has already talked about because she's covered really a lot of things. I'll try to add on. So just to give you a difference in perspective, in computer science, usually people do not need postdocs to get an academic position because that's the way the job market is. But again, a postdoc, even in computer science, gives a big advantage. And the advantage that it can give is that it can make the first few years of tenure track much easier. And essentially in a postdoc, you prepare you do research, you don't do any teaching. And teaching can really take up a lot of time. So, and puts you in this situation when you have done extra research, which you don't necessarily show even when you apply, and you have essentially ready things under the table. So your first year comes and your first year review comes and you got things under the table that we can just put them up there and say, you've done that. And maybe this was things that you did last year, but it's so important because impressions matter tremendously, especially first impressions. So postdoc, I did a postdoc in computer science. It helped me land a position together with my husband in the same place while we had a two-body problem. And two-body problems are notoriously difficult in academia. But for us, it was clear that doing postdocs would be the ticket to get a position at the same place, and this is what we did. And so yes, postdoc is a great idea. For CVs in general, for your preparation, I would think that try to avoid any kind of padding, because people can see through. So as clean as possible. Research and teaching statements are very important, but not as important as a clean CV, because people will first, and almost every year on the search committee, what we first look at is the CV. We look at the CV and we also look, what are the names of the letter writers? Can we recognize any of the names of the letter writers? So this will bring me to another issue of who you should select to write letters for you. But a clean CV is the number one, and this immediately is the thing that will put your application aside from everybody else's. If you are on this, like, let's say, sort of short list, then people may look through your teaching statement and your research statement. It's not necessarily true that they will, but at least the advice that we give in computer science is that your teaching statement should be 1 page long, your research statement should be longer than your teaching statement, at least twice as long. So usually like a quantitative measure. Your letter writers are very important. So usually, I remember like when I was applying for positions fresh out of graduate school, my letter writers were people from my professors from my department. I didn't have other letter writers. This was a huge disadvantage. This is a huge disadvantage. What you really want, especially as a postdoc, is to work out relationships with other people who write letters from you that do not come from the same institution as you. So being present at conferences, presenting your work, collaborating with people from other institutions. Now the thing that usually our graduate students have is that they go and they do internships in research labs. Now they can secure this way a good letter of recommendation from one of the top people in research labs. So that's the extra thing that they can. So if it's something that could work for you, try to do it. Isn't it doing summer internships? If this thing is something that applies in your discipline, in computer science it does apply, and we really recommend our students to do that, to be able to build their letter writers list. Now, supposedly that you already got your interview, you're on your short list, there are two kinds of things that might happen. They might call you for a phone interview, and this is usually because they try to see, actually your English, because they wouldn't have called you at all. I mean, if you're a foreign student, they will try to see can this person communicate. I mean, it's going to be a disaster to bring this person to give a talk. So that's the purpose of more or less of the phone call, of if there is a phone interview. Now suppose that you went through the phone interview, if there is a phone interview, because a lot of times there is no phone interview. Like Liz said, the most important thing is going to be your presentation, your talk. So it's got to be very polished. Practice it a lot, not only from your own research group, but with people from other research groups, and this can be really very important because you're going to be talking to everyone in the department. People need to understand your talk. So it is important to get feedback from people other than your research group, so they can understand it. The talk is essentially you've landed the interview because people have seen your publications. Essentially, you've got like the stamp of research. Now they want to see how can you communicate, how can you teach. So this is sort of like a teaching test. Can you do it? And there are different ways to do a talk. I mean, there are different ways that can work with different personalities, with different people. What I usually like to see, I'd like to see a talk that will for sure be for 50 minutes sharp. It's not going to take longer, it's not going to take less, no matter what. So you're going to be very prepared, very polished to do exactly like that. I would say the first half hour needs to be accessible to everyone. And then you have 20 more minutes, okay? 10 minutes, blow them away. Just, tell them stuff that they don't understand. It's okay. I mean, just make it hard, okay? To really show that you've done great. Throughout your talk, put things that, put your publications. So this is going to be probably your research. So if you can substantiate the slide by putting where this thing has been published, you look better. At the end, spend 10 minutes working on future work. And this is extremely important because people are going to hire you. So far, maybe the first half hour is like, okay, this person can teach, great, can communicate. The next 10 minutes will be like, wow, has done great research. And now is the future, the next 10 minutes, future work, extremely important. Somehow there, you've got to have not one project, but I would say 2 or 3, which are going to be essentially an overview of future proposals that you're going to write if you go to that department. So you need to come across as confident, as that you know exactly what you're doing, as you know what's your future. It's not that you're going to go to this department and say, okay, now what? That you know what is the next. And it may seem like too much, but preparation is everything. So even like when you start thinking about that you have to really put it together, you will come up with ideas of what to do next. So it is really, it's a very good thing to do. I would say usually what happens in the interview, it's important to be prepared for the interview itself. So do your homework, go through the webpage of the department, see each professor, what they do, see what classes they teach. Make sure that you're not going to step onto their toes, because one of the things that they will ask you is like, oh, what would you like to teach? So you've got to be a little bit somehow careful what you would like, what you're going to say there, because you don't want to sound like you're too aggressive, or you're going to take away some of the favorite classes that some people teach. So you got to strike a good balance. You got to be a little bit careful how to do this thing politically. At the same time, the question what you would like to teach, if you go to a research institution, for sure you're going to say that initially you would like to teach seminars or upper level graduate courses in your area of study, because that's the way to recruit graduate students, and immediately you score a point, because it looks like you have a plan how to build a research group. And then, of course, you can say on things for undergraduate teaching. You can say, I can teach all my, basic courses in my discipline. And you can say, but these things I would prefer not to teach. So that would be a good way to get away from, sticky situations, and kind of sort. But you got to be careful in the way this thing is going to work. You're going to have individual one-to-one meetings with people, and then it's going to be either one-to-one or 1-to-3. So what we usually like to do in our department is we have, and I think it's a very effective way, not every department does this. So we see a candidate in groups of 2 or 3 faculty, because it is more effective and quickly, and somehow you're not repeating the same things again and again and again. It needs, and try to make it less tiring. And in this, expect people to be asking you questions about your research. Make sure that you can recognize who these people are, so you can say something specific about their work. Ask them about what they do, because they will ask what you do. And then it's good for you to ask them what they do, because it looks like you're interested, you're not that self-absorbed, and at the same time, you want to explore possibilities for future collaborations with them, and people will like that. So that's, for sure a very good thing to do, to know what they are doing, so you're prepared and you can, move on. Try to be very polite during the interview. I know we're us scientists, many times we can be very shy, and shyness can be interpreted as rudeness sometimes. So it is important to be relaxed, confident, and social with people. Talk. Not to be like, oh, this is so hard. Just don't, you may feel like that, but don't communicate this thing. Another question is like, how can I feel really relaxed and confident? Having a very well-polished talk will help you feel that. Being very prepared on what you're going to wear in that interview will make you feel like that. So, have outfits. I mean, it's important. I mean, you got to be wearing things that you feel that you are polished, you feel, you look professional, and you feel comfortable. So this should be like, strike a good balance. And make sure, for women, have your power lipstick, whatever this thing is. I think it's important. I mean, like, it is important to be there and feel comfortable and confident. Have 2 outfits. Very important to have like this. My interview outfit number 1, my interview outfit number 2. Because some of these interviews are 1.5-day interviews or 2-day interviews. They may also have like a dinner. So you got to be 1 or 2 dinners. So you got to be sure that, strike a good balance. I still remember the candidate who came to interview with a duffel bag. He had a duffel bag where he had like all his stuff. I mean, it doesn't look good, okay? So it can be a backpack, but make sure it's professional, looks very good, okay? For women, it can be, you don't have to interview, you got to have a suit, but it doesn't have to be, it can be a pantsuit, okay? Sure, it's more comfortable to do that. If it is, make sure that you go where you are interviewing, because if you're interviewing anywhere in the Midwest or in the Northeast, the weather, I mean, you've got to think of things, practical things that are going to be, you're going to see them in front of you. So having a good coat is important. Well, what else? Talking about shyness, so try not to be shy. I know it's a bit hard. After a few years, then it becomes easier, because being sometimes rude is because we are shy. So just striking a good balance. And try to not underestimate the people, the secretaries, the people in the main office, wherever you go. Be very polite to them. They have very important, because if you are rude and you somehow act that you are superior, it's just like a red flag is going to come up right away. And we do ask our main office what they think of the candidates. And they are quite insightful. I mean, the body language, the way they interact with our secretary when they do like the reimbursement, it's very important. So be very important. And just to say what my advisor used to tell me is like, you can judge somebody not by the way this person talks to the dean, but the way this person talks to the janitor. So, keep this thing, keep things in perspective. All these things matter tremendously. When you go and how you present yourself and how eventually, let me see, what else do I have? Oh, here, talk to people. Yes, be talkative, it's a good thing. At the end of the interview, you will do what it is called the exit interview. So you will be talking to the chair. At that point, you have to be ready and have your shopping list. Essentially, this is what I want. Here's how my startup package should look like. Okay, this is my talk. I'm sorry. I forgot to turn off my phone. We can just ignore these things. It's just telling me I arrived at home. So, I apologize for this. Yeah. So the chair, what the chair is going to do is going to ask you what you will present you the offer, how it's going to look like. So this offer is going to say, and then at the same time, this is your opportunity. This is truly your opportunity to say, okay, this is what I want. Know exactly what you want, what kind of equipment you want, what kind of startup package do you want. This is your opportunity to negotiate. The moment you get like a written offer, it's almost like late to negotiate because the chair has already been to the dean. So preempt things at this point and say, like, if you have something specific in mind as salary, and you can always have this thing by doing some research. At least in our area, we have the Computing Research Association, when all salaries are published for assistant professors, and they are published by different tiers of institutions, and there's a lot of information. So for us, we can go and say, okay, here is the mean, here is the median salaries, here's what they expect. I mean, and this is your opportunity, really, because the chair, then if the department decides to hire you, then the chair will start this lengthy negotiation process to the dean. So you don't want him or her to start one process and then go again with another process. So you'd like to be, upfront. At the same time, what is really very useful is to talk to your colleagues, to your other people like you who are interviewing. And get information from them. Share information. Don't be secretive. Like, be as open as possible, because then you become more powerful because you know more things. Like, when I came here and in my interview, and I had my exit interview with the chair of the department, he gave me an offer. And so I asked, well, what would be the William and Mary starting salary for an assistant professor? And he gave me a number. And I told him, that's not a good number. Because I know that my friend Liz, who is interviewing at the University of New Hampshire, got an offer which is 8K more than this, and she doesn't even have a postdoc experience. And I do have a postdoc experience, so I expect something better than Liz. So I would know that because if Liz had not shared this information with me, okay? So what Steve did at that point, he went to the dean and he gave 2K more than what Liz got. This is what he asked the dean. The dean approved it. And what even helped me even more was that Liz was on the short list of the William and Mary, so it's like a little bit lower than me. So somehow this worked out really very well. But the important thing is like to talk to people, talk to your colleagues, talk to your office mates, share information with them. It is very good. It can be very useful. I think that's what I spoke to.
Yeah, I also have some more notes, and I'll try also not to repeat anything. But maybe I'll just start with this exit interview, because that's not something that is common in physics. So maybe I'll just go through the typical job interview, or the campus visit, as we call it. So let me see, I have my notes here somewhere. So typically in physics for us that's going to be 2 days long, so that's very standard. There's not going to be any phone interviews. That's very uncommon, except for adjunct or visiting assistant professor positions, of which I maybe have seen 2 advertised in the past 5 years, so they're not common, and certainly not in research positions. You'll meet with, as already mentioned, with half of the faculty approximately, sometimes in groups, sometimes individually. You'll also meet with the chair of the department for a little bit longer and with the dean, typically. So that's, with the dean, for example, we've mentioned dual career issues, and I think that's maybe something that's of interest, and we can talk about that more afterwards. But one time when you could bring up dual career issues is when you're talking to someone who's not part of the official job selection committee or search committee, and the dean would, for example, be a good candidate. So you can mention that there's someone else in the picture, and whether there's any accommodations that the institution can make for that. Then there's going to be an interview. Typically we do that over lunch, so you have a lunchtime interview with the search committee, with the 4 members or 5 members of the search committee. And that's when you'll be asked the questions about which courses you want to teach, but also that's what basically the exit interview would be equivalent to. So that's when we ask, okay, what kind of startup funding do you think you'll need? How much lab space do you need? Or if you're a theorist, which courses do you not want to teach? Things like that. The colloquium in physics, we make a distinction between seminars and colloquiums. So colloquiums are for a more broad audience than seminars. Seminars are people in your research subfield. So we have this 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 rule for colloquia, which says that the first third should be interpretable by undergraduates and first, second year graduate students in the department. Then the second third of your talk should be understandable to the graduate students and the general faculty of the department. And in the last third of the talk, you can talk about material that's subfield specific, that is more in your own research field. And that's also where you would talk about what you indeed want to do in the future. There would be typically a dinner with the search committee, and you hear back a couple of weeks later. The negotiation phase then only starts when you get the job offers. That's probably the only time in the entire job search where you have all the power you'll ever have for the next 50 years. That's the only time when you can negotiate on salary, on which lab space you want, and think about it. If you can negotiate your salary up by a few $1,000s, that amplifies over 40 years of service here. So that's a huge difference. It's also the time when, usually in physics, the department chair, so the search committee makes a recommendation towards the faculty of this is the person we want to hire, then the entire faculty votes on that. So it's not a decision by the search committee, it's the entire faculty who makes that decision. Also based on, you mentioned input from staff, we also talk to graduate students, we ask undergraduate students, okay, what did you think of this candidate? And for graduate students, we even quite formally go through that. I don't know if we asked the PTSA directly, but so there's certainly input from many people that is considered, and so the entire faculty votes then, and only then does the search committee's job end, and the chair makes the offer to the candidate. And once we've gone through that entire process, that's when we sort of hope that we're done. So we hope that we can close the entire deal quickly then, and so that's when you can ask your questions. Okay, I want this much more, I want this lab space, I want an extra graduate student supported for the first 2 years while I am applying for funding. Let's see, that's sort of the campus interview. Since in physics it's very common to do postdocs, in physics if you want to apply for faculty positions you can count on 2 postdocs before you apply for faculty position, before you get a faculty position. In theoretical physics you can even probably assume that you'll have to do 3 postdoc positions. So maybe I can talk a little bit more about yeah, it does take a long time. That's definitely true. part of that is just the realities of the situation in theoretical physics. There are so few positions there. It's a supposedly more prestigious subfield of physics. So many more postdocs and many more graduate students go into theoretical physics or are driven to go into academia. There's also not really a clear exit path once you're in theoretical physics, because in experimental physics it's easier to exit to industry. So there's no attrition in the ranks there. So maybe I can say something about how postdoc searches are done as well. So in this case, we don't have search committees, although I hear that might change here in William & Mary at least. But typically the power rests with the faculty member who, after all, got the grant to pay for you. There's typically a short list of only 2-3 postdocs, and what happens in physics is that we don't interview we don't invite all 3 postdocs and then make a decision. We do typically invite the postdocs candidates to campus for a one-day interview as well, and you have to give a seminar, so there's a seminar about your research. But so what happens is we schedule those postdoc campus visits as needed. So we start with the best candidate on the short list. If we're for some reason not sure, we go to the next one and then to the next one. Typically, that also means that if you do well during your postdoc interview, before you leave, you might know that you got the job, which is always fun. Then application materials, we didn't talk, well, we did talk about that. One thing that is maybe typical in physics is that in your research statement, again, there's this 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 rule, where you talk for 1/3 about what you've done in the past, and why it was so great. Then you talk for 1/3 what you're doing now, and basically what you're working on, what might have publications that indeed come out in the first year that you're at the institution that you're applying to. And then 1/3 about what you're going to do in the next 5 years. Basically, what are you going to do before you get tenure? And you have to be very specific. I see research statements where it's very vague when people write, I am considering blah. That doesn't sound very specific, so you have to use really action verbs. When you have a position of leadership already, or you're a leader of a collaboration or something, definitely point that out. And what is also important in physics is to have a sense of where you're going to get the funding. So you don't need to know how much funding you're exactly are going to need. You don't have to say, I need 120,000 a year for this and 15,000 a year for that, but you have to know, are you going to apply to the National Science Foundation, Dept, Department of Energy, or other organizations. Then in physics lately, I mean the last 30 years, there has been increased interest in physics education research, and a lot of good things are coming out of that research. I think you'll find that you might want to read up on that, because sometimes in teaching statements, there are many teaching statements in physics because let me just start that sentence over instead of, so in physics it's rather uncommon that you have teaching experience by the time you apply for a faculty position. Certainly if you have any teaching experience, then after those 3 postdocs you've forgotten most of it. So most of the time you don't have any teaching experience. That means that we get teaching statements that often are talking more about how to supervise graduate students and undergraduate students. That's not really what we're looking for in a teaching statement. What we're looking for more is the students that we're teaching most, which is undergraduate students, actually, pre-med students. So the research on physics education in the past 30 years that specifically gears on like large classroom teaching is very interesting, and then if you can include that somehow in the teaching statement, that's definitely going to stand out and make it better. There may be one other thing that's specific to physics is we have those large collaborations, in particular in particle physics, where there are 200 authors on papers. Sometimes you're an author on that paper, you didn't actually do anything more than run shifts on the experiment or provide your input in the drafting process, We didn't actually write the paper. It's important to point that out, and again, in the list of publications, list those separately, list those as collaboration papers, and then list the papers where you've actively collaborated in the drafting, list that as papers with substantial involvement in the analysis. I think that's about all that I was still going to add. Maybe one more thing. So in addition to independence, which is indeed an important thing, and independence, and I think you probably meant with that initiative and starting things, in addition to that, what we're looking for really is originality. So we want we want faculty who will do something that's original, that's new, not just, well, maybe build on something that has been discovered before, but not just do the same thing and the same thing and the same thing. So coming up with something original, taking a new approach, even if it's not clear whether it's going to work, even if in 3 years you might realize that was a dead end, that originality is much more important. And so we want that in a teaching statement, we want to see that. Yeah, and that, I think that's about it.
Actually, you gave me some ideas to add
Great.
some other things. So talking about originality, this is a tough thing because especially if you go and you do a postdoc with somebody with a very famous group. I mean, it's natural that you go somewhere and you can be accused of not being original, not being... So the question is like, how do I handle a question like this? And it is... And the best way, I think, to handle it is that, at least that's the way I handled it, it worked for me. I was interviewing at Michigan State, and one of the questions during the colloquium that I gave at the end was one of the faculty members asked me, well, you are in a famous group at the University of Illinois, the Unreached group. So, and what you presented is a lot of the research that you did there in that group. So, how can we be sure that you will be successful when you come here at Michigan State? You're not going to be in that group anymore. No, and then you got to be ready to answer to this kind of questions because people are going to be direct and quite aggressive. So my answer to them was, well, yes, I've been in that group. That's a very good thing for me. It really helped me out. And but the work that I'm presenting and my future work, some of my future work is going to be a continuation of the work that I'm doing, and some of the future work that I've showed you is going to be it's going to be new things that I'm not doing with them, but maybe they have been spared from the work that I started with them. So really, it's up to you to take the risk if you want to hire me or not. Really, because what can you say? If they can tell you you're not original enough because you were fortunate enough to work with these like famous people, that's not a liability, right? So somehow you got to, don't be, I think one of the important things like how to handle this kind of situations, like be prepared. I would like to say two more things like about your preparation, your package, about your statements, your research, teaching statement, because really in different disciplines, different things work. So share your package with your friends who are also applying it. So try to get to share information. Also look a lot on the web. There are some people who get like all the interviews. Download their packages. See how the packages look like. Try to make your package look like them. And actually start doing this thing not the year that you are graduating, not the year that you're looking for a job, but look like 2 years in advance. Look at the job market. Look at your institution, the people who are, your institution is are interviewing. Most probably, these are the most sought out people from everyone. So, how's their package? What's the extra thing that they have and they have landed so many interviews? And try to get the same things, because different things work for different disciplines. Try to get, what's the thing that I need to have to be in that position 2 years from now? So that should be like your thinking. When it comes to negotiation for salaries, the most important thing, really, that's your bottom line. So it can be like a great startup package that includes a postdoc and this and that and here and this other thing and whatever it has. And I apologize again for this. I'm so sorry. I should have just turned it off. But it's really your salary, that's your bottom line. So you got to have like a good, decent startup package, but I would not share a startup package with a lot more money and postdocs and whatever with another startup package that has a salary that is like 10K higher than the first one. Like, don't even think about that. Because the bottom line, what comes to your pocket, your base salary, when all your future raises are going to be based on, is that. So that's extremely important. Finally, during the interview, there are two things that that become like very important. Ask to meet with graduate students. Not every department will have a meeting with the graduate students, but it's a great thing. I mean, we have always a meeting with graduate students, and this can work both ways, because then we can ask the graduate students what they thought of the candidate, and you can also go to meet the place. How are the graduate students? Are they good quality? You can ask them simple things like, what do you like best? What do you hate most? And they feel like closer to you because you're like them. So they will be probably more open and you can find out more things about the place. Now, at the same time, be careful and still be guarded with the graduate students, because I remember, I think it was the University of Rochester, when the meeting that I dreaded most was the one with the graduate students, because boy, they really grilled me, okay? They were like, so be guarded, don't be very relaxed, okay? Still try to, always try to keep, a balance between them, because, but try to understand, what's going on. Another thing which will be very important is to ask what is required for tenure. And you should ask this question to different people, because most probably you're going to get different answers. But at the end of the day, you have the answer. So what do I have to do to get tenure? That should be one of the first questions to ask people in these individual meetings. Write things down. Don't be shy to write things down, because you look, more professional, really. I mean, it's impressions that count, and you write things down, and then you have and then people, we can ask how many people got tenure in the past 10 years, how many people did not, and why. What was the mistake that they had done? Also ask them how quickly, how soon are you going to be getting feedback on your performance. That's extremely important, because if you're going to get feedback on your third year review, and they can tell you things that by that time it's too late to fix or change, it's too late. So you really want to have early feedback. So ask for early feedback and ask from different people. Also, you want to know who makes the recommendation for tenure. In some places, it is the entire tenured faculty. In some other places, like Penn State is famous for that, it's just the committee. It's a committee that makes the decision. And that committee, you can be like the luck of the draw, and you can have a crazy person in that committee. It's always, so you want to know, because all of these things, you'll get a feel, because this interview, it's a two-way thing. They are interviewing you, you are also interviewing them. Because at the same time, you want to make sure that you are in a place where you feel comfortable, a place where you can succeed, a place you can be successful. So you want to get this idea, I mean, you're going to get this idea in your interview. That's your only chance, right? And ideally, you want to have more than one choice. So you can really pick and choose which is the place that works best for you. And maybe throughout the interview process, maybe you end up having an offer from the place when you really feel that that's the place where I want to be in the rest of my life. So you can even cancel your future interviews because you found a place. That would be great. But it's important to have this two-way thing. You're also interviewing them.
I think we can open up to questions now, if anyone has any.
I've got a question. So let's say, hypothetically, you're a fourth-year graduate student, What kind of steps would you take to prepare yourself to land a postdoc, to land, after that, to land a faculty position? What would you recommend? I don't know if there's anything other than doing research and teaching.
Publishing.
Publishing?
Publishing is really, I mean, it all gets down to the publications, I think, because if you're trying to be competitive for, a really top-notch postdoctoral position, then if you've managed already to get a paper out from your PhD, then, you're already in a really strong position. And I think starting to think about who your letters of recommendation for that postdoc might come from, and that gets back to some things that we talked about before. But the bottom line is, especially for the postdoc, is that the publication.
And I have to add that in physics, you get postdocs by having one letter of recommendation, and that's the phone call of your advisor to the postdoc advisor. That's what is the most important. So the way to prepare is to find who you want to work with and contact them and basically convince them before you even are ready to start a postdoc that you're excellent for a postdoc there. So build those relationships at conferences, talk to those people. Like when you go to a conference, look up when they're giving a talk, send them an email in advance and say, hey, I'm going to come to your talk. Do you have time to go for coffee afterwards? Something like that. So basically just general networking, and then and of course ask your advisor who they have good connections with as well, and where they would see you working well, and who they would recommend you well to. So.
Yeah, in biology, I know in some of the labs that might be considered the most desirable in a particular discipline, there's waiting lists, for postdocs, and so the networking is a really important thing to do, because even if your PI calls up and say, hey, I've got this great graduate student, they would really like, to do a postdoc with you, they'd be fantastic. The answer might be, well, I'm not taking any new postdocs for 2 years. So it is, networking, that's a good thing to bring up.
The other thing that, in addition to postdocs where you're working for an individual PI, an individual principal investigator or faculty member, there are postdocs where you're paid on a fellowship. For example, national labs have these directors fellowships or excellent scientist fellowships. The National Research Council, NRC, has this postdoctoral fellowship. So those are places where you apply centrally, and there's a selection committee. So that's more like a faculty search minus the campus visit. But then, of course, you get money for your project. The PI, the faculty member that you're going to work with, or the national lab scientist that you're going to work with, it's not his or her money. So you have more independence. Sets you up for a great position afterwards.
At the same time, this shows that you have more experience in submitting proposals. So there is, I think, the National Science Foundation has the postdoctoral research associate positions, and this is the application is easy. I think it's 4 pages. So you need to find a faculty member who is willing to host you, and then you write. You submit the proposal, and it's exactly through FastLane that we all do when we submit to the National Science Foundation. This is something very prestigious, and it looks good, and also shows like the extra-ethical proposal experience.
I have 2 questions. One, do you put your unfunded proposals on your CV then, to say that you have tried to get funding, or?
Actually, as an assistant professor for the first 3 years, I did. Because even as an assistant professor, because I was trying so hard to get something, and finally I landed it in my 3rd year, but it takes time. So yes, you should do it. I think yes.
And
It shows you've been trying.
I understand the point of that it shows you've been trying, but I think if all of the proposals are unfunded, then to me that raises a red flag. So there's something to be said for trying, but if there's no success whatsoever, even if it's a very small travel grant or anything, then not sure that I would include that. To me, there can be a negative message with the unfunded proposals. That's just a difference in opinion, but that's what you'll get on search committees looking at things. So maybe include one or two, but not all of them if there's a whole long list.
Yeah. My other question is, what about like the publications? Is it better to have like 2 first author publications coming out for PhD, or like 10 co-authored and 1 first author?
Discipline specific,
Yeah, it depends on the quality of the journal that the publication is in. And if you have 2 first author publications and they're in really high quality journals, the top in your field or the top tier, then to me that would be far more impressive than if you were buried in the middle of a long list of authors on some papers that maybe are not in higher profile journals. But again, it's very discipline specific, and some work is so collaborative in nature that it's likely that you'll always be at various points in a long list of authors because that's the nature of the work. So that may be something that needs to be explained either by one of your letter writers, or you might annotate your publication list in some way to make it clear what your contribution was if it's not obvious.
Actually, if I may pick up on that, so it certainly is fine to talk to your letter writers and tell them what you think their letter should convey. So tell them that I know that you know my work well on this particular paper, so please could you point that out. So you can shape the message that your letter writers send just as much as they can. They still have the final word.
So we're frequently told that service type activities like reviewing manuscripts or serving on committees or whatever at our graduate school is important for our CV.
Yes.
Account for things.
Absolutely.
Thank goodness.
As long as it's not at the expense of getting your
Oh,
work done
no.
and publishing, but
I'm just glad that's not a lie.
no, it's important.
It's true.
In
It shows
particular
that-
leadership activities,
Mhm.
like if you're organizing a conference or you're chair of graduate student association or something like that, then that shows initiative and it shows independence and it shows that you've probably had to apply for funds through that organization and organization.
Reviewing for the community, it's important. I think it's like it's groundwork that all of us have to do, and people start, and it's great exposure, I think, for graduate students, because they learn a lot, because just by having to review papers of others, then they can understand what they should do in their own papers. So,
Then I have one additional question, and it's regarding open access journals. Do they all have a stigma, or?
it's discipline specific.
Okay.
Yeah, that's just something to
There's a lot of
ask a lot
buzz
of
about it right
colleagues.
now.
There's some that have a decent reputation, and then there's others that it's still questionable. So you'd have to ask a lot of colleagues in your area.
In physics, some of the best journals are open access. So another thing that sometimes comes up is even when you give talks now, if you give a seminar somewhere, consider it a job talk. So
Okay.
any talk you give is a job talk. You might not know it yet, but
So, and one thing I was thinking about with the seminars, we've all talked about how it's so important to be so prepared and polished and all of that, but you also have to be prepared and polished for the question and answer section at the end. And that's when a lot can be revealed about a job applicant. It's in their ability to answer questions on their feet, and you need to get practice with that, because you can be completely polished and know exactly what you want to say in your seminar, and it can come across as brilliant, and then someone could ask a question that would make you look like an idiot in front of everyone. And so it's having a lot of, get really mean people to come in and grill you and ask you questions so that you're prepared for everything.
At the same time, I think the meanness of people can be like infinite. Take also some things at the end. I mean, some of these meanness, take it lightly, because you cannot really pick yourself for somewhere up. They can be like people, and it happens when they can start asking you from algorithms in computer science is one of the very basic graduate classes that we take. So in one of the interviews I had, somebody asked me an algorithm question, which is really to be able to answer this kind of question, I need to transport myself back into the class 6 years ago and remember what was happening. I thought it was extremely rude. So what happens is that the candidates get very offended. So if you feel like offended by questions like this is not the right question. Because they can be some like good technical questions versus mean questions. So like being able to somehow.
But if you have the practice with those questions, then you're not fazed by them, and you know how to respond in a confident way. Like simply saying, wow, that's an interesting question. I have to go back 6 years to my algorithms class and sit down and think it through. That's a perfectly acceptable answer. But it's, do you get frazzled? Do you lose the ability to retain command, of your performance? And interviews don't always go as smoothly as you would like. When I interviewed here, I was thinking about your outfits and things. I didn't bring, enough outfits, and I was coming from New Zealand, but I was on sabbatical in Boston. It was February, and I was dressed for Boston. And I came down to Williamsburg, and it ended up being 75 degrees, and I had a turtleneck and corduroy pants and a blazer and all of this stuff, and it was roasting, and it was in Millington Hall, and the air conditioning, of course, wasn't working. And then they switched my seminar to the first day I was there instead of the second day, and my flight had been delayed on my way down. I ended up having to spend the night in the airport, fly in the next morning, and then find out that my seminar was about 3 hours later, and I was in a turtleneck and it was 75 degrees. And you have to go with the flow and just continue to be, okay, I'm ready for this, I can talk about my science, and it doesn't matter in the end. But that could just completely throw you if you didn't feel prepared and in that mode of, I'm interviewing them too, and I'm confident, and but yeah.
On the other hand, I don't think you should be afraid of asking for, can I just have 15 minutes to, step aside or so, especially if you're coming in late like that, as long as it doesn't throw the entire schedule in the water, because that also, again, I think that demonstrates, you're confident and you're willing to stand up for yourself.
I just took my blazer off in the middle of the seminar and shoved my sleeves and pulled my turtleneck down and kept talking.
Now we're going to get into the real meat of the talk.
What are you going to do? Yeah.
And I think with those campus visits, you can certainly come away from one of those visits thinking that this was terrible. But you might be completely mistaken as to how that came across to the people at the place where you visited. So you get a job offer, for example, and then you're completely surprised by that happened.
Well, there's no more questions, and if you guys don't have anything more to add, I guess we can end early and say thank you to our panelists. Oh, sorry.
I have one question. It seems like you guys have all interviewed at many places. Like what's the average, probably discipline specific, but the average number of interviews you would expect?
I'll just answer first because I'm just an oddball in basically my entire life path. So my first faculty position, as I mentioned, was in New Zealand, and this was done by a phone interview. And I was offered the job, and I took it. And then when I decided that after 9 years there that maybe I didn't want to stay there forever and retire there and to come back to the States, I knew it was going to be a little bit tough, but I had a sabbatical year coming up, so I figured I would try to look for positions when I was back in this area. In fact, I only interviewed at 2 places, and one was William & Mary, which was the position I really wanted. So I did not have a lot of interview experience, and I did none of the things that I was advising you to. Like no practice talks, nothing like that. But anyway. So you can talk about
I guess I'm
other
also an
interviews,
oddball then. for 2 postdocs, got both of them. I mean, obviously I could only take one. And then I applied to one faculty position and got it. So my experience is very little. I don't know why I'm sitting here.
It's kind of how I feel.
Well, I guess I've interviewed a lot, so. And I have to tell you, I really liked it. So I really enjoyed interviewing because it's a way to make, it's a time when you can make professional relationships with people, and these professional relationships will come up later on in your life. And it's a time to enjoy because really it's a celebration of the work that you have done. And I accepted the position at William and Mary, and I think this was my 5th interview, and then I had one more. After William and Mary, I went to Purdue. After the interview, I said, like, I'm not going there, I know. I called the chair from Purdue. I discussed with my husband first because we had like this 2-body problem, and we had both an offer. We had both an offer from William and Mary. We actually had an offer from William and Mary, both of us had an offer from the University of Kentucky, both of us, and 2 more interviews scheduled for both of us had scheduled interviews together at places, and I had 2 more interviews. I had like 4 more interviews coming up, but at that time, after food, I said, like, okay, we'll accept William and Mary, and I was just so sad to cancel the rest of it. Because I loved it. It was just so much fun. Because then you go through this, and then you go, it's like, you're the center of attention. I like that. I mean, it's like, it's really all the work that you have done, you have the chance to show it off. People pay a lot of attention to you. It's fun. I like it.
I like the seminar and the dinners and meeting with faculty, but what I really didn't like was having breakfast with people. I'm not a morning person, and I'm completely antisocial before I have my coffee, and I schedule breakfast meetings in the morning. It's like all I could do to be civil. So that part I didn't like, but the rest of it is actually fun, and meeting different people and talking about their interests and seeing different institutions and all that.
I don't know, how do you balance, like when you're in a postdoc looking for your next postdoc versus looking for faculty positions? When should you make that transition?
Both at the same time?
Yeah.
Do it. Yeah, I mean, I said, I think you really want maybe 2-3 years as a postdoc, but then there's no reason not to start applying for faculty positions, but you should have the backup plan because, so applying for both is fine.
And is it common to defer a faculty position if you're still a postdoc?
That certainly is possible, and we've had a couple of recent hires who deferred for a year with my encouragement because I really felt it was important for them to complete another year of their postdoc before coming here.
Why did you think it was important for them?
Well, for one of them, he only was a year into a postdoc, and I just felt like, again, to have that solid foundation before starting a faculty position is really important. So I was saying, you really should negotiate over it. I'm the chair of biology, so when I do the negotiations, I say, you really should ask me if it's okay to defer. That would be a good thing to ask, So for me, it's just, if you bring someone in, you want them to get tenure, and the first thing to do is make sure that they're coming in as strong as possible.
Yeah, because when you start a faculty position, it's like a brick wall. You get work done, you're basically a full-time researcher as a postdoc, and then suddenly you're a full-time class preparer and full-time somewhat service person and full-time looking for grants and everything but researcher for the first year. So, and then things settle down.
So balancing time is hard at the beginning. It's not easy.
So I have a question in terms of publications with large number of authors. How would you indicate your contribution to that on, say, a CV? Because otherwise, you can't really indicate that. It's just going to be a long list of names, and yours is going to be mixed in the middle, and it's up to the reader to decide what you did on that.
I would provide an annotated list of publications separate from the CV that after the publication indicates your particular contribution to that paper. It's a separate document, but I think that's a better way of doing it than trying to put it in the CV, which just makes the CV sort of long and cumbersome. But that's something that we are used to seeing, I think, in biology applications, is this explanation of contributions from multi-author papers.
Okay.
And the order of authorship differs between different disciplines and subdisciplines, and sometimes it's helpful to know that, maybe in my area, being at the point of being the last author is like a milestone in one's career, but in another discipline it doesn't say anything to be the last author. So there's things like that where actually having that annotated list, if people are interested and want to know more, they have it, but they can still just look at your CV to see what publications you have.
So in computer science, for example, in theory, all publications are done strictly alphabetically. So people who work in theory, alphabetically. People who work in systems, it's usually the first author who is the one who has built the system. And the rest is people who, their grandfathered into the paper because they built part of the system in the past. It's a mixed, so it is really, and that's usually where your letter writers should do their job and be very specific about your contributions for your publications.
Okay.
So I have a question, since I also apparently don't have all that much experience.
Sorry.
How did you make the decision so your partner was applying also for computer science jobs. How did you make the decision to let the universities where you applied for, how to let them know?
Okay, at that time, so we interviewed at William and Mary 17 years ago. So at that time, the computer science market, it really depends. The answer is depends on the job market. The computer science market was, we interviewed when we graduated in 95, and in 95 the market was not good. I got interviews because I was a woman in computer science. He got 2 postdoc offers. One of them was an NSF postdoc to work with a top person in his field at the University of Minnesota. I got 6 interviews, some of them at top tier places, some of them at third tier places, and I decided to go for a postdoc. And one of the 2 postdocs that my advisor found for me, because I didn't like anything. Before I had a top tier place, I knew that I would be creamed. If I were to go there, I would never get back. So I knew exactly, after the interviewing process, I knew what I was having. So we were in 2 postdocs at different places. I was at the University of Illinois, he was at the University of Minnesota. In 2 years, the market opened up a lot. So we started applying. We tried to look for places that they had multiple positions when both of us would apply for. William and Mary had 2 positions. One would truly photograph me, and the other one would photograph him. And we thought like, wow, let's apply there. Although we had gotten, I have to say, that 2 years before, we had also applied to William and Mary, and we got a very bizarre rejection letter from William and Mary, which was to the point, it was like, oh, we were talking to our friends and we were like, wow, you still apply to that place? So it was a bizarre rejection letter. It was not crafted, nicely. So what they did was that they could not really tell that we are a couple because we had different last names and different affiliations, although obviously it was from the same place. But somehow they see the last affiliation. So they called us for phone interviews. They did a quick phone interview thing. So I knew Andreas was at that time when I got the email for the phone interview. Andreas was interviewing to a place somewhere in Louisiana. So I emailed him, and he's like, "Did you get a phone interview from William and Mary?" He said, "Yes, I did." So I was very happy for that. So they called me. When they called me first, and I was my phone interview slot was at 11, and his was at like 11:30. So they called me and they asked me like, why did you apply to William and Mary? And that's a classic kind of question. So I did, the usual spiel. Oh yes, this place, very similar to the place when I got my PhD, balancing research and teaching, blah blah blah. Okay, I did all this thing, and then in the end I said like, we also have two positions, and I have a two-body problem. I see silence at the end. Oh, what was this? Nobody said anything. Like, oh. I said like, but luckily you get to talk to my husband because he's scheduled to talk right after me. And there was this like, phew. So, for this kind of thing, and actually the chair was really quick and said like, okay, we decide to call you for a campus interview. We will interview you both because we know that you have a two-body problem. And actually being candid in an interview can always pay off, I think. Actually being candid will pay off for us. We also interviewed together. My husband got an offer from the University of Kentucky. They had not scheduled an interview for me, but when he told them that I've also applied, then they called me for an interview. So, because they really wanted him. So they called me, they made us an offer. We did not like Kentucky. It's just William and Mary made more sense to us. And then we had more interviews when we had explicitly, in some places, when we realized that we can be open and say this thing explicitly, that we are upfront, and we actually, in some of the places, because more positions come up, and the more we realize that, okay, the job market is quite good this year, we can do this thing. So in some of our cover letters, we wrote explicitly, and we got 2 more double interviews, which we didn't go. So it is really, it's very discipline specific. And so in this case, William and Mary were very lucky. They wanted to interview us both. At Kentucky, Andrea said, my wife is also applied, so they looked me up and they invited me. But he said this thing at the interview.
Okay.
So you have 2 tenure track positions here?
Yes.
No.
But at the same time, this is like, okay, William and Mary does not have the reputation of a top place. We would have both been at top places, but separate. But I would have children calling So it's like the kind of thing that you got to, you balance, and you got to balance. So, like, do I want to live like far away from my husband? I didn't want to. I wanted to have children right away.
Any more questions? I'm cutting one off again. Okay, well, if not, well, thank you so much to our panelists. It was so wonderful having you here.